Ambassador Crocker, you mentioned there's abundant evidence that the security gains have opened the door for meaningful politics. And I think we all agree that the purpose of the surge was to create the space necessary for the politicians to do their work. How do you strike a balance between giving them space and providing a convenient excuse not to reach conclusion on some of these debates? They're talking about federalism, for example. I mean, we can have debates here on the topic. And we do have such debates. But how do you respond to the criticism or the assumption that they would move faster if we had a more precipitous withdrawal or drawdown?
I'd make two comments, sir. First, we are engaged in this process. I spend a lot of my time, as does my staff, working with political figures, sorting through issues, offering advice, twisting some arms from time to time to help them get done what in many cases they've laid out as their own objectives, but find it a little hard to actually get it over the finish line. So we are involved in that and will continue to be. With respect to the point on using leverage, using troops as leverage to say, we're going to start backing out of here regardless of whether you've got it done or not. As I said in a slightly different context earlier, I think we have to be very careful with that. Because if the notion takes hold among Iraqis that what we really do intend to do is just execute a non-conditions-based withdrawal, say the famous precipitous withdrawal, I think it pushes them actually in the wrong direction. I think it creates a climate in which they are much less likely to compromise because they'll be looking over our heads, concluding that the U.S. is about to pull. So they had better be getting ready for what comes next. And what comes next will be a giant street fight. It's not a climate, I think, that lends itself to compromise.
If I might then, without us putting troops aside then, what other leverage do we have? Is it aid that is contingent on them moving forward? Some of the, with regard to some of the benchmarks, what else is effective? Is there something that has been used in other scenarios, say the peace process in Northern Ireland, are there anything that you've used in prior diplomatic efforts that would be more useful here?
Again, like so much else in Iraq, the political dynamic there is probably not unique in world history, but it is pretty special. And while we're always looking for good lessons from outside, in the case of Northern Ireland, for example, where an international commission was formed to help the people work through issues, we've gotten the documentation on that, and we've made it available to Iraqi political figures as something that we and they might work with. They've got that under consideration. Clearly, we do have leverage, and we do use it. I mean, the presence of 160,000 troops is a lot of leverage, and we are using those troops for their security. That gives us, again, not only the opportunity but the obligation to tell them they've got to use the space they're getting to move forward.
In the remaining time, I have quickly for the General. Some argue that the presence of U.S. troops gives al-Qaeda simply a target. Is there a difference between their attacks on U.S. troops as opposed to attacks on other coalition forces? I know there are different regions, but in Basra, for example, where the British have been.
There are virtually no al-Qaeda really in the southern part of Iraq because, of course, it's a Shia area and much less hospitable to them. We think there have been attacks over time occasionally, but nothing at all recently in the southern part of Iraq.
In other areas, is there any evidence that, and I know we've performed different roles, the different coalition forces, but is there any evidence that they they are more likely to attack Americans and other coalition forces?
No, in fact, they're probably more likely to attack Iraqi forces right now. In fact, they're very concerned by the rise of particularly these local volunteers who have been assimilated into the Iraqi forces, because that represents a very, very significant challenge to them. It means that locals are invested in security, and of course they have an incentive that folks from the outside can never have. They are going to fight and die for their neighborhood, again, in a way that others who might come in from elsewhere would not be willing to do the same. So in fact, we've seen a very substantial number of attacks on these forces as they have become more effective, trying to take out their checkpoints, attack their bases, and so forth.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman.